Welcome to The Explainer. We've got a wild story for you today. A pretty bizarre proposal about Greenland that popped up over the weekend is sending shockwaves through markets, all the way from Tokyo to New York. So let's break down exactly what's going on, and more importantly, why you should care.
All right, let's jump right in. Look at this. As the week gets started, it's just a sea of red across Asian markets. You've got Japan's NIFTY, Hong Kong's Hang Seng, Australia's ASX. They're all taking a hit. It looks like they're following some negative signals from Wall Street, and it's really setting a pretty nervous tone for the day.
So you got to ask, right? What in the world has investors so rattled? Why are we seeing this kind of sell-off pretty much across the board? Well, get this. The answer isn't in some boring economic report. Nope, it's something way, way more unexpected.
Okay, so let's call it the epicenter of all this anxiety. It all traces back to one single, really dramatic event that happened over the weekend. A political move that's being dubbed the Greenland Gambit.
So here's what went down. The White House basically threw a huge match on the fire of global trade tensions. They put out a direct threat for some pretty major new tariffs. But here's the twist. This time they're not targeting a single rival. No, they're aiming at a whole group of some of America's closest allies in Europe.
And this is where the story gets, really, really weird. The reason for going after these specific countries. It has nothing to do with the usual stuff like trade deficits or who's making what. Now, the threat is directly, explicitly tied to a U.S. proposal to acquire Greenland. And these nations are on the list because they're the ones who've been pushing back against the idea.
And, this isn't just talk. They've put a very clear and, honestly, a very aggressive timeline on it. We're talking a 10% tariff kicking in on February 1st. And if there's no deal, that number jumps to a whopping 25% by June. That is some serious pressure on these European economies.
So as you can imagine, the fallout was immediate and it was just as dramatic. Europe's reaction was, let's just say, not subtle. Leaders all across the continent were on the same page, and they were furious. You had French officials coming out and publicly calling it blackmail. They're even pushing the EU to fire back with their own trade defense measures.
Okay, so let's shift gears and look at how this is playing out back in the US. Because what's happening is it's creating this really fascinating but also kind of dangerous conflict for American markets. You've got this battle between a really strong economy on one side and this sudden massive political disruption on the other. And this right here really lays out that core tension perfectly. It's like a tale of two stories, right? In one column, everything looks great. You've got strong forecasts for stock growth, the US is still leading the pack in AI, industrial numbers look good. But then you look at the other column. This new tariff threat is just a giant wrench thrown into the whole machine, and it's piling on top of worries people already had about inflation and interest rates.
And to really understand why this tension is such a big deal, look at this number. Just a few days ago, before this whole weekend drama, the general agreement was that U.S. stocks would grow by a really healthy 10% this year. That was the baseline. That was the expectation before this whole thing blew up.
So if you're a U.S. investor, this is the main takeaway for you right now. The underlying business environment looks good, but in a way, that almost doesn't matter anymore. Suddenly, U.S. policy is the number one thing messing with the markets. It's completely overshadowing all that good economic news and making absolutely everyone rethink their strategy.
All right, let's zoom back out and look at the global picture. Because a move this big, it's like dropping a huge rock into a pond. It doesn't just make a splash in one spot. It creates these ripples, these aftershocks that spread across the entire global economy.
Remember those numbers we looked at right at the start? Well, now they make a whole lot more sense, don't they? That drop in the Asian markets is a direct reaction to all this. Investors over there are looking at the shaky U.S. futures, and they're basically hitting the sell button because of this brand new layer of political risk that could mess up global trade for everyone.
But you know what's kind of fascinating? With all this chaos going on, you think it might change what the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to do, right? Well, nope. The market is still overwhelmingly betting. We're talking a 95% probability that the Fed is just going to hold interest rates right where they are. So for now, at least, it looks like investors are thinking, okay, this is a political mess, not an economic crisis that the Fed needs to step in and fix.
And of course, the place feeling this most directly is Europe. They're ground zero. As their markets are getting ready to open, the futures are pointing way down. And here, the reason isn't complicated. It's not a mix of factors like in Asia. It's simple. They are the ones directly in the crosshairs of this new tariff threat.
So the stage is set, right? The dominoes are starting to fall. Things are obviously super tense, and nobody's really sure what's next. So what should we be watching for? What are the key things that are going to signal where this all heads from here?
Okay, keep your eyes on three major things coming up. First, President Trump is speaking at Davos soon. That's a huge one. Is he going to double down on this whole thing or maybe offer a way out? Second, there's a Supreme Court ruling that's pending on whether these kinds of tariffs are even legal. That could literally change everything overnight. And finally, there's that Fed meeting. You can bet everyone is going to be hanging on every word to see what they think about all this new instability.
You know, this whole thing is just, it's a crazy, real-time reminder of how tangled up politics and money are these days. A single political idea, something that came up over a weekend, can literally reset the financial risk for the entire planet in an instant. It just leaves you with this one big, lingering question. In a world that's this connected, where's the next tremor going to come from?